everyone. Welcome to the Sci-Tech Asia virtual seminar. We are currently live on Facebook. My name is Gonçalo Santos. I'm an anthropologist, currently based at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. I will be hosting this virtual seminar series together with my colleagues Loretta Lowe, based at the London School of Economics, and Yi-Chan Rao at the University of Hong Kong. We are all members of a research network and online platform called Sci-Tech Asia, which is really the collective force behind this virtual seminar series. You can check us out on our website, scitechasia.org. Our network and its website as well were launched sometime in 2017 by a small group of colleagues based mostly in Hong Kong, but also in other parts of the world, in Asia, as well as Europe and North America. What brought us together really was the conviction that everyday lives around the world were increasingly or are increasingly shaped by developments in science, technology, and medicine, and that it is important somehow to kind of promote approaches to these intermediations from the critical approaches of the humanities and social sciences. There is a growing number of Asian scholars working on topics at the intersection of science, technology, medicine, and society. And this virtual seminar will give us an opportunity to showcase this cutting edge research taking place around the world. I'd like to hand over the floor now to my colleague, Loretta Lowe, who is going to introduce our speaker this afternoon. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our the second series of the Sci-Tech Asia virtual seminar. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our second speaker today. The title of her talk today is very intriguing. It's called Unfolding Anthropocene Dumplings, Animals and Sustainable Food Advocacy in Asia. It's a topic that's close to my heart, and I very much look forward to it. So our second speaker is Gina Song Lopez. She is a first-year PhD candidate at the Center of East and Southeast Asian Studies at Lund University. Her doctoral research focuses on the expansion of the plant-based and vegan movement in Asia and the role of environmental and animal advocacy movements in transforming human-nature relations through food. So very exciting stuff. And without further ado, let's welcome Gina Song Lopez.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Sci-Tech Asia for organizing this and giving me this opportunity. I'm going to just cut this all the things short and just go to my presentation. Whoops, did I? No, it's the wrong one. Sorry. Share screen. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Yeah. Okay. So Loretta already introduced me, but just a little bit more about me, as probably no one knows me. I'm very new in academia. I did my bachelor's in the University of Queensland, Australia, where I majored in political science and international relations. And I did my master's in Taiwan at National Tsinghua University, where my thesis was titled "Can the Non-Human Speak? Ecopolitics and the Animal Protection Movement in Taiwan," which served as the basis for what I wanted to do for my thesis research. So. And if you're wondering about my accent, it's because I grew up in South America. So my mother tongue is Spanish. So yeah, that's my very brief introduction about myself. So my topic, Unfolding Anthropocene Dumplings. Basically, the inspiration for this research came about from not from these headlines, but this is an example of very recent headlines that maybe some of you have seen, and it's causing some discussion, especially as to what is plant-based food, or why will anyone want to make plant-based food, and who is eating plant-based food. So hopefully I can provide some answers to these questions. So yeah, my contents, I'm going to basically talk about the introduction of these products into the market, the ethical and sometimes somehow religious, sometimes background to these foods, and also the translation that is going on from vegetarian food with, at least in Asia, from vegetarian food with somehow religious connotation into vegetarian food or vegan food in a ethics, environmental sense. And then I'm going to go into what I mean by Anthropocene flavored dumplings. To start discussing this, we need to first look at how the foodscape in Asia is changing, especially in the last decades with increase of affluence and the rising middle class. The way we eat has definitely changed. Our diets have diversified, and that also have brought a certain number of issues. But there are obviously some scholars that are looking at how these diets have changed, and most prominently that refers to the westernization of diets in Asia. We're eating more bread, wheat, fats, and some have termed this as the meatification of the Asian diet, and especially like in China or Vietnam, especially China, with increased consumption of meat. But my research looks at the other side of this story, which is the rising interest in the health and the ethics and the environmental aspects of food. Perhaps some of you have seen these new products that are showing around, especially, well, my research focuses mostly or comes from Taiwan. So that's my frame of reference. In Taiwan, we have had in the past few years a very rapid increase of these kind of vegetarian foods. These are examples of some of the events going on, like the no meat market, which is recent. You can see after the dates are very recent. So from there, a lot of people will think, but is it actually new? Is plant-based food in Asia something new? Well, it's actually not, because as anyone that has studied Asia, we will be familiar with Buddhist vegetarianism, at least in the Sinosphere part of Asia. That it definitely has a long history. For example, Buddhist vegetarianism, that Chinese Buddhists are not required to be vegetarian, but the nuns and monks have been since the Emperor Wu during the Liang Dynasty. Before that, there was no actual mandate requiring them to be vegetarian, but there is some research talking about that there is actually, it was kind of socially expected, but it was not mandated until then. And that's how today when we see vegetarian Chinese nuns and priests, they will usually vegetarian. But besides that, in Asia, there is some cultures practice occasional vegetarianism, like during the first and 15 days of the lunar months, and also like people are more committed practitioners of Buddhism will be vegetarian. But then there is also certain temporal occasional practice, like maybe someone will make a promise to, or a request to a local deity in exchange of some favor, and they will promise to give up meat for maybe a short period of time, or maybe for a long period of time. And then also, as Loret has talked about in her research, she knows more about this. Sometimes when there is sickness or death in the family. So what is new about all of these new meats, like this new movement if there is this background. So what I argue, what is new is that now the vegetarianism, veganism, it's strongly connected to the emergence of animal rights and animal welfare advocacy in Asia, especially in Taiwan. These are examples of the animal rights marches in the past 3 years. Well, there was supposed to be one this year, but for obvious reasons, it didn't happen. And the message that these animal rights advocates are, it's very similar to the message of animal rights everywhere. Like, animals are friends, they're not food, they're not supposed to be experiments, they're not handbags, or fur is not, like, animals need their fur more than humans, things like that. So what is different in Asia and what is different now? Basically, what is different is that all of these groups are they're trying to change the meaning of advocacy, at least in Taiwan, especially in relation to their pre-existing religious background. They're trying to move away from compassion to animals because certain religious text says, or because the Buddha said so. And this is a bit of a map, network map that I drew, and they're also like highly or semi international. And they're connected to overseas group, like Anonymous for the Voices is an international grassroots group, and they're more focused on animal liberation. Well, we have the RSPCA or SPCA that focus more on animal welfare, and also like they focus on lobbying and things like that. So this is just a small illustration of what that looks like. But so now I actually get into what they're actually doing, which is they're working in translating the meaning of 素食 to 素食, which in I guess this sounds similar, but in the sense of the character, you can see that one has a religious sense to it, and the other one is very secular. And the reason why I decided to focus on the matter of translation for this project came about from listening to some activists that on a totally not related talk, but they were talking about how translation is a form of praxis. How the act of translating back and forth between languages creates a constantly circulating economy of ideas. And that really struck me looking back at the history of animal advocacy in Taiwan, because of I'm going to elaborate this a little bit later, but basically how this relates to ideological translation. Basically, in terms of Taiwanese history, the idea of animal ethics in a Western sense came with the work of this organization called the Life Conservationist Association. They started the work in 1993, but I guess the main contribution in this movement, well, besides all the work and legislation, contribution to the legislation they have done, is that they translated Peter Singer's Animal Liberation to Chinese, and that has served to spread the concept of ethical animal rights to the population in Taiwan. And I guess also like that text might have traveled around. I don't know about the specifics of Nextdoor back then. So that serves as an introduction to how the animal rights movement in Taiwan came to be. And one of the reasons why they did this translation was that the Life Conservation Association was started by a nun, and they wanted to move away from the association of their work as just another religious organization promoting compassion for animals. They wanted to really engage with the modern ideas of protecting animals and giving them rights for the sake of that they're living beings and they deserve rights. So they definitely provided like the first wave of animal protection, I'll say. And since then, the animal protection movement in Taiwan has changed, not drastically, but quite a lot. And the movement has come in contact with even more newer concepts that they incorporated into their advocacy work. And one of those concepts is effective altruism. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of effective altruism, but basically effective altruism is a philosophy and movement that focuses on how to do the most good, most effectively. That they use science and human behavior to try to come up with ways to what kind of actions and behaviors will end into the most good. And they focus on cost prioritization, and one of the causes that they prioritize is animal welfare. So they actually have very strong links to the industries and groups that are researching and lobbying for more plant-based and also cell-based and in general alternative proteins, because that will reduce the number of animals for food and therefore reduce the amount of animal suffering. Sorry. So when it comes to effective altruism, there is actually a sector of effective altruism that focuses on effective animal advocacy. And part of that advocacy is effective vegan advocacy. And there's like two people that are very prominent in this movement, Melanie Joy and Tobias Lindner. They actually travel around the world and they give talks to activists about how to more effectively communicate and reach more audience and convince them into how to create more alliances instead of contention, because it's a lot of people are might be familiar with like the angry vegan and things like that usually turn people off from the movement. So a lot of the current animal advocacy groups engage with their ideas. I know that in the past month there have been some conferences with animal advocacy groups in Asia, and they have been present in some of them, or to some degree. They have also given speech. So there's a picture of the 2018 one, which I actually attended, which in which they talked about all this concept of how to effectively promote, and also one big area of interest here is that of like changing the dietary system, and by addressing carnism, which is the cultural systemic I guess reliance or need that we have of eating meat. So this aspect of theological translation then needs to be somehow materialized, right? So then I'll go back to that later. So then we get into material translation. So the material translation of food is basically what actually makes meat. How do we how do we take plants and turn them into meat? So there's a whole industry behind it. As Sexton talks in her paper, Eating for the Post-Anthropocene, Alternative Proteins and Biopolitics. The whole enterprise or or effort to turn plant-based meat into meat in general for what we consider meat. It requires it's very connected to biopolitics, and it requires the industry to develop this, and also it requires the industry to give effective discourse and to convince people that this is edible. So and which also interconnects with the vegan advocacy groups, because that's what is ideal we will do. We will accept that this is edible and a good substitute for meat. So the industry behind this is actually it's a huge network of that. This is an example of the work of the Good Food Institute that have identified in top 100 companies in Asia that deal with the different aspects of how to turn plants into what we consider meat. They also deal with lab-grown meat, but at this point, plant-based meat are still a little bit more advanced. Even though if we look at just the news from yesterday, Singapore just approved the first commercially consumable lab-grown meat pieces that we might be seeing them pretty soon. So this just gives you an idea of actually the whole networks behind just creating plant-based food. So it's just for illustration purposes. But then also when it comes to changing the system, there are other things that facilitates that. So in this year we had the coronavirus, which brought way more concerns around the world when it comes to food safety, especially in Asia. I mean, when the news about coronavirus coming from animals in a wet market, animal advocates were perhaps some of the first people to point out, see, this is what happens when we mess with nature, when we abuse animals and eat animals. So it definitely gave their discourse, it reinforced their discourse, but also it changed our perception of what is edible, because only now we maybe double think of, oh, where does this meat come from, things like that. And I thought that it was important also to bring about what just happened in Taiwan last week, which was that the current administration decided to allow import of pork meat from the US that is known to be treated with certain additives that are not particularly safe for eating, and the opposition party went and disrupted the legislative UN session by throwing meat around, and also people protested. And then again, safety concerns change our perception of what is edible. So how does this all matter? So why does all of this, what does animal advocacy matters, and why does the plant-based movement matters? Well, I guess anyone that has a bit of interest in vegetarianism in general will be familiar with not only the animal ethics aspects of it, but there is also the climate and the social justice aspects of it. So when it comes to this movement, I guess the most important role they're playing now is in the transformation of food systems for the Anthropocene. And I think just thinking back into the last session of Sci-Tech Asia, Professor Harrell was talking about the ecomodernism, the ecological civilization in Asia. And I think when it comes to food in Asia, also we might also kind of jump on that train of modernism, and that like plant-based modernism, I could call it, because if we look at how all these new foods are being promoted, they're promoted not so much as going back to nature and being natural and farm to table. It's all about the food of the future. So this is just an example of, for example, this is the logo of Omnipark, Hello Future. The Beyond burger in Chinese is called 未来汉堡, which means the future burger. And also like in Taobao, for example, they have this specialized store that is called the future meat. So and everything, so there's like a very big emphasis of not so much as oh, let's go back to eating things from countryside that is organic and everything. It's more, it's food of the future. So this is all related to from the perspective of sustainability studies and the important change in the regime transition. So we are, so while Asia is like it's part of this global network of this agribusiness that has very strong emphasis on meat, we're also having this niche of resistance and change that is starting to create an opening for alternative proteins. So this is basically what I've been looking recently. I am the latest part of my project is very rough, but I'm saying how these animal advocacy actors and industry actors also play a role in bringing about the certain aspects of the sustainable development goals, in particular the aspect of responsible consumption and production, which is interconnected to climate action and life on water and life on land. So yeah, these actors, they matter. All of these, maybe small grassroots activities to these bigger startups, they all matter because they play roles in changing, maintaining, or transforming the current regime. But also they matter. They are in Asia, and they matter because geography plays a very important role. And as Raven had access, niches do not come from nowhere. And if we think about it, a lot of the alternative protein originally in the very first forms came from Asia. Tofu, mock meats, going back to vegetarian Chinese cuisine. They probably serve as the inspiration for what is happening right now. So they're definitely deserve more attention, and also, as I talked about earlier, I actually did not elaborate too much, is that they're increasingly engaging in the global discourse. So at least and for these are examples of how they have integrated local and global discourses for animals in Taiwan. For example, in 2017, for the Ghost Month Festival, which is known for the banquets, for the Pai Pai banquets that we need to worship our ancestors, remember our ancestors during this specific time of year. A lot of the food, it's meat. So in this case, they use that to draw attention, but for the dead animals, the animals are sacrificed in this case. This picture is of it's a very controversial festival in Taiwan. It's called the Sanzu festival. And basically in this festival, it's for around Chinese New Year, Lunar New Year. So where the fattest pig wins the prize. So they're usually force-fed, and animal advocacy people consider this it is animal abuse. And after the pigs are overfed and weighted and they win, they're slaughtered and then display in around, which is not it's very a little bit morbid. But also they're engaging in with international networks. So the international animals and the National Animal Rights Day actually is international because this was held in coordination with other animal rights groups around the world to hold this event. And actually during this, they also use a similar kind of remembering the dead animals and saying a little prayer for them. And last year, in the last Animal Rights March, it was supposed to be, it was organized in conjunction with the official animal rights, which takes place around the world. And I think this last picture also like I found it worth including because this is from the Halloween, this past Halloween, where this group of activists put on these masks and they kind of try to blend in with the kind of general Halloween spirit, but at the same time they were holding the death pictures of animals and walked around the mall and kind of try to draw attention from the people attending the mall that where there's all this consumption going on, that where their food was coming from. So that was very interesting. So yes, well, lastly, just back to my talk on socio-technical regimes. When we look at the plant-based movement, then when we see this is a picture of the omnipork dumpling that is being sold by Bafang Inji in Taiwan. So some people might just simply see, oh, this is a vegetarian vegan dumpling, but then there is this whole network that I try to sort of illustrate here. Behind it, there obviously there's the food sustainability aspect, and obviously the very strong animal advocacy aspect. But then also again the industry that I did not manage to overdevelop because that's not so much my area. But just to give you an idea of all the apparatuses behind. And yeah, and finally, all of these, the way we consume food matters from an environmental perspective, because as Weller said, food after all provides us with the most intimate links between humanity and nature. So that's basically my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gina. I really enjoyed the talk. So while the participants in the seminar perhaps think about questions to ask regarding your presentation, perhaps I could start. I could start by asking a few questions. Meanwhile, I'd like to remind everyone about the basic guidelines of this seminar. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so via writing. You can write in the chat box your question, or you can simply, give a shout and let us know that you'd like to ask a question, and we'll put you on a queue to ask a question to the speaker. You are more than welcome to turn on your video and show yourself to turn the seminar into a more human like endeavor. So yes, please start preparing your questions if you have questions to ask. Meanwhile, I'd like to ask you a question about your title, the Anthropocene. And I'm very curious to know more about what's inside these Anthropocene dumplings. Not so much that I mean this in a literal sense, but rather that I'm very I'm very intrigued by the way that you're using the concept of the Anthropocene. I mean, the concept has come to stardom in the last 2 decades within, not just within anthropology, but really across the human sciences and the natural sciences, really. I mean, everybody's with some kind of concern for environmental issues will be interested in the concept. And to the point that in some countries in Europe, of course, the concept has already entered the textbooks of high school students. I mean, I'm talking about, for example, in Germany, you are now taught about the Anthropocene as you go into high school. I'm not sure about the situation in Sweden. But what I wasn't very clear in your presentation is to what extent you are the one that is articulating the concept of the Anthropocene in relationship to your materials, or whether it's the activists that you have been following and studying. And if that's the case, I'd like to know a little bit more about what's the role of the concept of the Anthropocene in the 2 groups of people that you've been following more closely, the animal advocacy people and also the environmental movement. Is it a prominent concept? Is it something that perhaps will be invoked in certain, discussions with international actors? Is it part of local conceptualization or regional conceptualizations of animal advocacy and environmentalism? So yeah, it's basically a question about the Anthropocene. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the concept of the Anthropocene in the global vegan movement, it is part of the talk because the vegan and animal rights movements are very much concerned with how humans have treated animals and how humans have treated nature. So they definitely have embraced this concept. But from the food advocacy perspective, it's very recent. Like I think 2 years ago, there was this very kind of publicized report, that it Lancet report that talk about the diet of the Anthropocene, and since then, basically all these different vegan food advocacy movements have embraced veganism or plant-based diets are the way to go. From what I have seen in the literature, some of them treat plant-based as the diet to move towards the post-Anthropocene, but some also just talks about the biopolitics, as the Sexton reading, as like this is the current dietary system. But like from the regional Taiwan perspective, the Anthropocene in itself, it's a very new concept. It's mostly in the literature humanities circles. I know that like in the current biennial Taipei biennial, actually is the main topic of the exhibition is the Anthropocene, but the activists themselves, I have not heard them use the word Anthropocene. Yeah.
Anyone would like to ask a question to Gina?
Can I ask a question if nobody else?
Yes, please. And yeah, and next is Eleni. Okay, Loretta.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for very fascinating talk. I love that dumpling slides in the end. It really illustrates like what you want to deliver in the title, the unfolding. And I think it's so rich that I really look forward to how your research unfolds over the years. So I have a few questions. So the first one in relations to Gonzalo's questions about Anthropocene, and also what you talk about at the very beginning of your talk about ideological translation and material translation. I think in my experience, because I work on the environmental movements and like very similar topics that you do in Asia, in Hong Kong and in Asia, I wonder if, because Taiwan has a very very mature publishing and translation culture in the publishing industry. So I wonder, while in Hong Kong, I haven't really heard of people talk about Anthropocene, I mean, among the activists or in the non-academia, but I wonder if the idea of Anthropocene is more, maybe become more prominent, or you hear it more in Taiwan because of its publishing industry. It has a very strong traditions of translating ideas from the Western academy to the Chinese. Is like very forefront. So I wonder if there's a link to that with relations to translation. And the second question is, so I've heard a lot of talks about vegetarianism and veganism, but this idea about protein industry, alternative protein industry is quite new to me. So I wonder if you can say a little bit more about how this like alternative, what it is alternative protein industry. Is it mostly, because I think there are a few groups of people who would be interested in this industry. So the first one that came to my mind would be people who are gym goers, like people who want to build up their body, but they are not necessarily like vegans or vegetarians. So can you say a little bit more about this alternative protein industry in relations to the vegan movement, and why was it a thing? Because obviously it's a new thing. Yeah, I have others, but I'll leave it to leave the opportunity to others. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions. So for the first, in relation to the publishing industry, I'm actually not sure. As I mentioned, the current Taipei Biennial, it's the main topic is the Anthropocene. So perhaps from that, maybe there's enough literature that have created an interest to have this very big public event that is centered around the concept of Anthropocene, or maybe that will lead to more interest in publishing things about the Anthropocene to the wider public. I think that's the only answer I can give to the first question. In regards to the second question, the alternative protein industry is actually, I guess as I mentioned earlier, it's a niche, and there's definitely a lot of things happening in relation to that in Asia. And for example, in case of for the gym goers and people that are into bodybuilding, there is an emerging group of people that are interested in veganism and bodybuilding, especially after watching this kind of popular documentary called The Game Changers, which follows the journey of this MMA fighter into veganism, and because he got injured after I think one of his fights, perhaps. Well, he got injured, and in his route to recovery, he discovered that, according to the documentary, that, for example, Roman gladiators tended to be a predominantly vegetarian diet, and then from there he kind of goes and interviews other vegan athletes, and that's definitely a big aspect now, and especially in Asia now, there's more people also joining this kind of fitness gym trend. They also are aware of these documentaries, so I know a number of people that are at least trying to be more plant-based, if not completely, in their bodybuilding journeys. Yeah. Did I answer the question?
We have two more questions. First from Eleni, please, and then Nigel.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Gina, for your presentations. Very insightful. Yeah, I just wanted your opinion on what do you think about this whole transformation of meat alternatives? Because obviously it's an easier way to convince people towards foods that don't necessitate their need for meat, because they just have this visual perception that they are consuming meat. But then what if there's such high demand of these plant-based meat alternatives that we end up over producing this meat, plant-based alternatives, and then we rely highly on GMOs and monocropping to sustain the demand.
So from like a market economics perspective, when animal advocacy actors talk about trying to encourage people to eat meat, in part their aim is to create enough demand to disrupt the market, but part of that is also to redirect the resources that go for producing meat into the plant-based alternatives, which according to the science behind it, it's more sustainable and uses less resources. So my views on that will be just look at the science. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Nigel?
Thank you very much. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm studying carnism at SOAS. So I was interested you cited Melanie Joy's work, and I wanted to ask, have you seen evidence of fight back from the meat-based industry in the same way that we saw fight back from the tobacco industry in the 1970s?
When it comes to fight back against plant-based foods, I think that I have only seen that in the West, because as with the recent European Union debate over what is a sausage, what is a patty, or like in the US, they also have like the meat industry doesn't want the plant-based industry to use the same terms for their burgers, but in Asia I have not seen that kind of conflict yet. Not yet. We will see maybe in the future.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please, June, go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. Just for, a first piece is just a quick information. In Hong Kong now, McDonald's is offering plant-based luncheon meat. I think they started only recently, I think this month or last month. So yes, it is actually started to get into, let's say, the Asia market, and I find it very interesting. And of course, I don't know how successful it is. And given my very limited consumption time in McDonald's, I haven't seen anyone order that meat-based luncheon burger yet. But let's see how it goes from there. So here are the questions. First of all, from a more fieldwork ethnography's perspective, I would like to know a little bit more about this animal activists and the relations and between the animal activists and this kind of a vegetarian plant-based meat movement. Would it be considered to be too elitist? I'm thinking about that, of course, based on from a China anthropologist perspective. If you look at the history of China, for a lot of people, having meat as an everyday diet is something quite recent. I grew up in one of the wealthiest cities in China. And as far as I remember, meat is always something quite, okay, I'm not young, so I can, let me say in the 80s, having chicken for dinner is rare. It's not even like once a week thing. We're talking about that in the 80s, 90s, things started to change. And we're talking about, this is one of the wealthiest cities in China. So let's factor in regional differences, rural-urban differences. We are possibly thinking about a large population only in the recent decades that eating meat becomes something regular. So now suddenly we have a global discourse like to advocate for vegetarianism, veganism, and there are different kind of attitudes. And there are parties, if you are going to parties in the US, I remember sometimes just saying or going out for dinner saying that, oh, I actually love meat, among your educated colleagues sometimes becomes quite a shame because everyone else seems to be vegetarian. And then suddenly you feel like you're really I felt like I'm coming from this is the third world country, not living up with the newest trend. However, I am very concerned, given the environmental concerns about the whole food production industry, which I get it, but I'm very concerned about this kind of discourse, also the kind of imbalance of power, the inequality, then the whole world systems. And when these kind of activists being put on stage and become such a thing, how does this kind of activism, let's say not deployed, but rather unfolded in both on the local and the larger scales? How does that speak to the power inequality on various scales? So that's first question. And then second, possibly it's also a little bit more technical, but I'm very interested in, as we talk about STS, there are a lot of ambiguities, there's a lot of contradictions in so-called science and technology development. A recent articles I have read says that, well, if you really are concerning about health, you should go for the less processed food. The less processed the food, the better. So in that sense, if you're eating a chicken, is that better than eating a processed, fabricated, somehow plant-based meat? Because I will assume that has to go through a lot of fabrication, industrial production. So how are we going to compromise, or what exactly is the science there? How are we going to read those science, whether it's from a political from a environmental perspective, or from a health or medical perspective? Thank you.
Okay, so two questions, the power inequality question and the expertise question. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very complicated questions. So for the first one, that you are absolutely right. The eating of meat is not it's a quite recent phenomenon, and I think like coming from Asia, and actually this is something that we discussed at Lund with my center before, that in Europe it based, at least in Sweden, it's the default for to have vegetarian meals when it comes to like university events. But so like when people want meat, it's kind of like, what? Do you want meat? But yeah, and in Asia, for us, people think it's normal to have a banquet with meat. And yeah, that definitely shows a very stark contrast in kind of like our current relationship with food, in between Asia and the West, I guess. And as you mentioned, I think it can be quite elitist, especially when you look at the people that are engaged in the advocacy movement. Some might perceive them, as there are people that are very well educated, they have studied abroad, they came in contact with the concept of veganism abroad and then brought it back. And so yeah, there's definitely and also like it's more of an urban phenomenon, not so much, it's not so much something that is happening in the countryside. So when and this is also something that the activist groups are discussing among themselves, that what works for like the more developed countries when it comes to advocating for plant-based food is not necessarily the case what works for in other parts of the world, where the income level is definitely not the same, doesn't match what we are buying here. What, like, I live in Sweden also, it doesn't match the average shopper here. So yeah, it's a very big issue that they're discussing, and they're definitely aware of this kind of contradiction, and how are we supposed to tell people that are finally able to afford all this variety of food for the first time that actually they should give up meat. So I don't actually have an answer to this, but I acknowledge that there is this class aspect that should be addressed, and I am definitely looking forward to see how activists engage with it. Yeah. And for the second question, which is the technical aspect, the main reason why also animal rights, animal welfare activists, etc., and environmental activists kind of are putting some of their hope or strategy into the promotion of these foods is not so much for the people that are already vegetarian or vegan or like flexitarian. It's more for the more reluctant people that are saying, oh, I cannot give meat ever. So this is like a good way to say, hey, maybe try this. And it's more for the reluctant vegans and vegetarians than for the actual people that are already or likely to adopt plant-based diets.
So you are saying that it's okay to tell people to go for unhealthy diet, and rather to go for meat but healthier?
Well, I don't think it's okay to tell people to go for unhealthy diet. It's more like it's the one strategy that it seems to be helping, but and I mean, when it comes to meat, it also depends on where are we talking about organically grass-fed free-range meat or factory pump of hormones kind of meat. So,
but isn't that the same problem with vegetarian or plants?
But
genetic engineered plants, there are plants that use a lot of pesticides. There are plants use fertilizers, everything. So the same problem that exists for animals possibly also to some degree exists in plant industry, growing plants. And I think at the end of the day, my question is I'm more interested in the more ethnographic perspective. As you said, how are these kind of a paradox being presented or argued among different groups, and how they debate about it? Where are the center of contentions? And what exactly are the kind of, what kind of power dynamics, how power dynamics plays out, among different groups? But also I'm very interested in what kind of economic interests actually are pushing for this kind of developments, especially when I see McDonald's get into the whole business. I started to think, what exactly is the deal behind it?
I think Nigel wants to intervene. Is it related to this issue, or is it a new question? Because you still have your hand raised. No.
No, sorry, that was a mistake.
Okay, so Gina, would you like to respond to this last comment?
Sure, I can try. Well, you're definitely posting a very things that I definitely should write down and look into my research now, because I have not really thought of these kind of power inequality relations. And I am aware of the more like what we were discussing, the technical issue of processed versus unprocessed. But I think I don't think I can actually answer your question. Not, at least not yet properly.
Okay.
Hey,
Well,
Gonzalo, I have a question, but I can't type in the chat box, so I'm not sure.
okay, so Yi-chan, would you like to go for it? Yes.
No, just a comment actually, just building on Jin's question earlier. So I just Googled all the news about plant meat in China, in mainland China context, I mean. Surprisingly, I don't see any text explaining this as related to environmentalism or Anthropocene or even health. People are talking about the market benefits or the market share of this meat and how far they are from to IPOs and what are the kind of main capitals are in there, like KFCs, like Starbucks. So I kind of felt it's a really interesting thing that the paradox that Jin just mentioned may not be even on the table yet. People are still talking about whether it could penetrate into the China market and thinking about the potential financial benefits from that. So I'm not sure how it could be different from other Asian markets.
Yeah, the market aspect of it is definitely, I think, yeah, that's definitely the most when it comes to news attention, and that's what it's at the forefront. Like when was it the Young one of these companies when public like the discussion of the market shares and all of that, that's definitely
Beyond Meat. Is
yes.
that Beyond Meat? Yeah. I guess I saw they opened the factory in China.
Yes.
And they're compared to Tesla.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely like at least what is. Oh, yeah, sure. There's one question
now. Anybody would like to ask still a question? Because if not, I have one.
I have one too, but I'll go after you.
Okay. Well, I actually have two quick questions. Okay. Which is sort of, one is related to what June and Yi-chan were saying to some extent. But it seems to me that there is a sort of a cliche that about animal advocacy and environmentalism in Asia, that somehow the movements are not very, to use a word that you use in your presentation, very politically contentious. So they are not into conflict. They are not into questioning, the big issues of political economy that are behind the meatscapes that you were talking about. And I wonder if your findings, your ethnographic findings, sort of concur with this kind of very stereotypical view of East Asian movements regarding these issues, or whether you found actually evidence of some effort to kind of articulate the critique of high levels of meat consumption on some kind of political economy or political ecology kind of argument, grounded in notions such as the Anthropocene, but many others, because it's really not clear to what extent that is the case or not. So that's sort of my first question. And the second question related to this has to do with geographies of activism. One of the things that struck me a lot while living in Hong Kong and looking at, talking to friends that are involved in the organic farming movement, is how, their reference point quite often seemed to be what was going on in the United States with, sort of US active, or maybe in Europe as well. And that kind of struck me in the sense that, those very American and European activists were drawing on Chinese sources of, permaculture and organic culture to kind of develop many of their ideas, right? So, and in the case of, animal advocacy and environmentalism, I think historians have shown, for example, how Europeans drew a lot on ideas coming from, Hinduism and also Buddhism and so on. So somehow ideas seem to circulate back and forth in kind of mimetical mimetical processes of transformation. And at different points in time, people will be looking in one direction or the other as the source of what is going on. So, it, you know, I kind of wondered what seemed to be the source of what is going on, you know, for the animal advocacy and environmentalist guys that you are following. Is it all coming, the global is coming from the West? The global is coming from where? I mean, what is the major source of inspiration? Yeah, thank you.
I think perhaps originally the inspiration did come from the West in the form of, you know, Peter Singer's Animal Liberation and people becoming familiar with this text and really starting to mobilize around it. But I think now, especially this year, I have seen way more regional work engagement when it comes to animal rights. Like there's definitely like a definitely local response now, and there's definitely regional networks that are forming, and they're trying to approach the animal advocacy from an Asian perspective. So I think that it will be very interesting to see how that develops. And in terms on the politics, I like when I started writing my master's thesis, my idea was the animals were political. And I still think that animals are political because, especially when we look at how we eat, eating is political. And whether we consider beef that comes from a cow to have rights, it's a political matter. But obviously there is also a current, at least the approach of these movements, in which actually I have seen some discussion in general in the whole sustainability movement kind of discourse that they're trying to be apolitical, which in itself is political. I have not conducted enough field work to able to see, oh, this is to present our results in terms of this, but I am aware that there is this discussion because I'm like 3 months into my PhD, so yeah, I still have not conducted a lot of things. Yeah.
Loretta, do you still have a question?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief and organize my thought. So the first one, so in response to what June was saying, I think I very much agree with it. That I think the points that she raised was valid, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, if you think about that, every research has its limitation. I mean, just hearing what Gina said, what her research was about, it seems it's to kind of unraveling all these connections, network to the plant-based and the vegan movement. I'm not sure if she needs to address, well, she needs to acknowledge that there's this sign of there's an elitist part of this movement, but at the same time, I don't know if she needs to give an answer to that, at least like in her research writing. But yes, I think those are valid questions and it should be acknowledged. But as a researcher, I don't know if she needs to go into detail of saying, like taking her stance. Because if you think about it, if her research was unfolding the meat dumpling, not the Anthropocene dumpling, the meat dumpling, like does she need to answer like if the meat production or the meat industry is ethical or like what would be better? I don't think it's her place to do that. And the second one is related to if it is problematic that McDonald's sells vegan burger. So I did research about green living in Hong Kong, and I've talked to a lot of environmentalists, and they actually really welcome that intervention. And I give you an example. So I interviewed, one of my key gatekeepers, interlocutors, he actually became famous in Hong Kong. You probably know about him by going to McDonald's and eat the leftover food on people's table. Because his battleground is not the big corporations, not the McDonald's and all these like big fast food corporation. His battleground is food waste. He tries to prevent food going into the already very, very fast filling up landfills in Hong Kong. So I think if you look at it from an ethnographer's perspective, from the anthropological perspective, you are interested in what these people think about, like their backgrounds. Not everyone's. I think it depends on which stance you take, because if you are looking at the broader political ecology pictures, then these people's choice of going for a McDonald's vegan burger seems very problematic. But they chose a different battleground. Their battlegrounds are local. They want to prevent food from going into the landfill. So I think there are more nuance and it's more complicated than, oh, eating a McDonald's vegan burger is a bad thing, it's a problematic thing. I think we need to be cautious with that sort of discourse as well.
Well, I don't think that
sorry
is
to interrupt you
question.
now, but we have a last question from Luo Yu. We have 3 minutes to go. Sorry to interrupt you, okay? Luo Yu, would you like to ask a question? So
yes.
Please be brief, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in relation to Gonzalo's question earlier, actually there was one, I think one slide that you talked about how the Taiwanese organization actually shift from Buddhism to more like Western animal ethics. And I was wondering, I guess, two smaller questions related to that or comments is, one, what does that tell us about, what does it reveal in terms of the broader changes of the Taiwanese society? Why did the organization have that transition? Is it like sort of appeal to the younger generation, or have more global exposure? And then I guess the second part is, I think, as Gonzalo said, I think it's not a very straightforward like unilateral transition from Buddhism to Western sort of animal ethics, right? Because I mean, in Buddhism, what had been thought as sentient beings. So there's actually a very interesting hybrid sort of ethical consideration therein in terms of what we consider as local or global or non-Western and Western, I guess.
Gina, before you respond, I'll take also Hans, because he had raised his hands for quite some time. And I think the point is in connection with Luo Yu's. Please.
Yeah, I'll make it super short. Gina, I thought it was super interesting. I've been interested in other culture areas. I do think it's absolutely right in terms of what June said and others. I mean, just looking you forward to a PhD project, what I can say from the outside, having looked at a lot of such projects, absolutely how the elitism kind of inclusion thing plays, that's very interesting. I think at the same time, the reality is that moral entrepreneurship, which is something you're kind of looking at, and I think in many ways is a good term to conceptualize at least some of that, is an elite, ends up often being a particular elite project. Yeah, but I think the cleavages that turn up is absolutely something that should be included just because it's so fascinating. So thank you just very much for your talk. Really enjoyed.
Well, no, thank you for the feedback. Is as you raised the question, I realized that I have not thought about it much. So that's definitely something that I should consider. And see how that work plays into what I want to do as I'm in a very early stage of my writing. I think there's space for it. But to answer the question, your questions, the moving away from Buddhism to a more secular, I guess in part that is for the two reasons that you listed, like to appeal to a younger generation. And like being more secular, but being more global, but at the same time, one of the main reason, just remembering me asking to people and my interviews, is because while they actually like there's a faction of the animal advocacy movement that sees this Buddhist background as a good thing, because Taiwan is very vegetarian, vegan friendly. It doesn't matter what for what reason you're deciding to give up meat, but at the same time this poses a challenge to actually spread the message that they want to give, which is like the actual ethical, environmental, for climate change kind of discourse. Because when people see these activists in the street, or they're approached by these activists, they hear, oh, like we don't eat meat, the first thing that they think of, oh, so you're like Buddhist. So it's a bit of an obstacle, and it's definitely the Buddhist animal ethics. These two things are actually a bit of a source of tension within the movement. So there's the ones that actually are trying to move more away and to be more effective in lobbying. So and then there's the ones that are that is kind of like, okay, it's part of the movement. But yeah, it's I think it's a very interesting tension that I intend to look into to further explore in the research. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to put an end to the talk here. It's already 3:15. This was incredibly fascinating. So please join me in thanking Gina Song Lopez once again. Yes.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope I didn't disappoint anyone. Yeah.
And our next speaker is going to be Mung Ai Choi, and the next talk is going to take place when, Loretta? Yi-chan?
Sorry, I just need to start my video. So the next talk will be on the 14th of December. It's about crane conservation in South Korea.
Thank you very much. So I'll see you again on December 14th, hopefully. Thank you. Bye-bye.